They say that trust is the foundation of every relationship. I learned, at 73 years old, that trust can also be the sharpest blade that cuts you when you least expect it. My name is Edmund Hartwell, and this is the story of how I discovered betrayal in my own home and orchestrated the most satisfying revenge of my life. It started on a Tuesday morning in late September. The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of my study, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where I had signed countless business deals over the decades. I was reviewing my monthly financial statements, a ritual I'd maintained even after retiring from active management of Hartwell Industries 5 years prior. The numbers were substantial: $47 million in liquid assets, another $60 million in real estate and investments. Not bad for a man who started with nothing but a toolbox and a dream. My maid, Clarissa Donovan, knocked softly before entering with my morning tea. She'd been with me for 3 years, ever since my wife Margaret passed away. Clarissa was 42, efficient, and seemingly devoted. She knew my routines better than I did, anticipated my needs, and maintained my sprawling estate with meticulous care. She was more than an employee, or so I thought. She'd become something like family in the lonely years after Margaret's death. "You're Earl Grey, Mr. Hartwell," she said with that warm smile I'd come to trust. "And I've taken the liberty of organizing your paperwork. Those investment documents were getting rather cluttered." "Thank you, Clarissa," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "What would I do without you?" "Let's hope you never have to find out," she said, and something in her tone made me glance up. But she was already turning away, her expression pleasant and professional as always. That comment lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. It was nothing, really, just a casual remark. But I'd built my fortune on instincts, on reading between the lines, on sensing when something was slightly off. And something was off. Later that afternoon, I went to retrieve a file from my study cabinet, an old contract I wanted to reference. The folders were immaculately organized, as Clarissa had promised, but they were organized differently than I'd left them. Not wrong, just different. The real estate documents were now before the stock portfolios, when I'd always kept them in reverse order. A small thing. A trivial thing. But I hadn't asked her to reorganize them. I'd only asked her to tidy up, not rearrange. I sat back in my leather chair, fingers steepled beneath my chin, staring at those folders. Why would she need to know how my documents were categorized? Why such interest in which files went where? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the darkness of my bedroom, listening to the old house settle and creak, and I thought about Clarissa. She'd come to me through an agency, impeccably recommended. I'd checked her references myself: a wealthy family in Connecticut, an elderly judge in Boston. Everyone praised her professionalism, her trustworthiness. But I'd built $100 million empire by being thorough. And suddenly, I realized I'd never been thorough about Clarissa Donovan. The next morning, I made a decision. I would watch. I would pay attention. And if my instincts were right, if there was something to find, I would find it. I had no idea, at that moment, just how deep this rabbit hole would go. I started small. Observation without confrontation. I'd learned in business that you never show your hand until you know exactly what cards your opponent is holding. For the first week, I watched Clarissa's routines. She arrived at 7 each morning, let herself in with her key, prepared breakfast, cleaned, organized, ran errands, prepared lunch, did more cleaning and organizing, prepared dinner, and left by 7 in the evening. 12-hour days, 6 days a week. She was worth every penny of her substantial salary. But on Thursday of that first week, I noticed something peculiar. I'd been in my study, pretending to nap in my reading chair, a trick I'd used in boardrooms to catch people off guard. Through half-closed eyes, I watched as Clarissa entered to dust. She did dust, efficiently moving across the shelves. But she also paused at my desk, her eyes scanning the papers I'd left out. Nothing confidential, just some correspondence with my financial advisor. She picked up one letter, read it quickly, then replaced it exactly where it had been. Her movements were practiced, careful. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was surveillance. My heart rate increased, but I kept my breathing steady and slow. She finished dusting and left. I waited 5 minutes, then went to my desk. The letter she'd read was about a potential restructuring of some trusts. Technical, boring to most people. Why would my maid care about trust structures? I decided to escalate my investigation. That evening, after Clarissa left, I installed a small security camera in my study. It was disguised as a book on the shelf, one of those spy gadgets you can order online. I positioned it to cover my desk and filing cabinets. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd review the footage, see nothing unusual, and laugh at my suspicious nature. I was not laughing when I reviewed the footage the next day. At approximately 10:30 a.m., while I was out for my daily walk around the grounds, Clarissa entered my study. She didn't dust. She didn't tidy. She went straight to my desk, turned on my computer. I'd foolishly left it logged in, and spent 18 minutes navigating through my files. She opened documents about my bank accounts, my investment portfolios, my will. She took photos of several screens with her phone. Then she opened my desk drawer, removed my checkbook, photographed several checks, and returned everything exactly as it had been. She was thorough, professional, practiced. This was not her first time. I sat in my bedroom, watching the footage on my laptop, and felt a cold fury settle over me. This woman I'd trusted, whom I'd welcomed into my home, who'd eaten at my table and listened to my stories about Margaret, she was stealing my information. But why? What was her endgame? I would have confronted her immediately, fired her, called the police. But something held me back. Perhaps it was the businessman in me, the strategist who'd outmaneuvered countless competitors over the decades. I didn't just want to stop Clarissa. I wanted to understand the full scope of her betrayal. And then, I wanted to destroy her plans completely. So I continued to watch and wait. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything. I installed cameras in 3 more locations. I logged every suspicious behavior. And the picture that emerged was far more disturbing than simple theft. Clarissa was building a comprehensive profile of my entire financial life. She'd photographed my tax returns, my property deeds, my insurance policies, my medical records. She'd accessed my email. I caught her typing on my laptop one afternoon when I pretended to be in the garden but doubled back. She was even recording our conversations. I found a tiny recording device hidden in the study lampshade. But she wasn't stealing money directly. My accounts remained untouched. Nothing was missing. She was gathering intelligence, but for what purpose? The answer came when I decided to investigate Clarissa herself. I hired a private investigator, discreetly, through my attorney. Within 3 days, he provided a report that made my blood boil. Clarissa Donovan wasn't her real name. She was Clarissa Donovan Martinez, and she was married to a man named Victor Martinez. Victor had a record: fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. He'd served 4 years in prison. And Clarissa herself had been investigated, though never charged, in 2 previous cases involving elderly employers who'd changed their wills under suspicious circumstances. The pattern was clear. Clarissa would ingratiate herself with wealthy elderly people, usually those who were isolated or lonely. She'd become indispensable, trusted. And then, somehow, assets would be redirected. The investigator couldn't prove she'd done anything criminal in those previous cases, but the coincidences were damning. One employer, a retired professor in Boston, had changed his will to leave Clarissa $500,000. He died 6 months later of natural causes, though he was only 70 and had been in good health. Another, the Connecticut family she'd worked for, discovered she'd forged the matriarch's signature on a power of attorney document. They'd settled quietly rather than prosecute, afraid of scandal. Clarissa and Victor were professional predators, and I was their latest target. The investigator provided more disturbing information. Victor Martinez had been seen in the area, staying at a motel 15 miles from my estate. Phone records showed frequent calls between them. And here's what chilled me to the bone. Victor had recently searched online for information about forging estate documents, about challenging wills, about getting power of attorney for elderly people. They weren't planning to wait for me to die naturally. They were planning to take control while I was still alive. I sat in my study that night, a glass of scotch untouched on the desk, staring at the investigator's report. I thought about Margaret, about how she'd have handled this. She always said I was too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. "Edmund," she'd say, "you're brilliant in the boardroom, but naive in the living room." She'd been right. But Margaret had also taught me something else. When someone comes after what's yours, you don't just defend, you counterattack with overwhelming force. It was time to set my trap. I began by changing my behavior subtly. I started leaving more documents out, making myself seem more forgetful, more vulnerable. I'd shuffle papers around as if confused, ask Clarissa where I'd put things, complain about feeling tired and overwhelmed by managing my finances. "Maybe I need help," I said to her one morning, playing my part. "Someone to help manage things. Power of attorney, perhaps. Margaret always handled so much of this. I'm just an old engineer, not a financial wizard." Clarissa's eyes lit up for just a fraction of a second. "That's very wise, Mr. Hartwell. Having someone you trust manage your affairs would give you such peace of mind. I'd be happy to help you find someone reputable." "Oh, I don't need to look far," I said, watching her carefully. "I trust you completely, Clarissa. You've been so good to me. Perhaps you could help? Just with the day-to-day things?" She hesitated, playing modest. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm honored, but that's such a responsibility. I'm just your housekeeper." "Nonsense. Your family." The word tasted like poison in my mouth. "Let me think about it. We'll talk more." Over the next week, I continued this performance. I pretended to have small memory lapses. I left my checkbook out more often. I had phone conversations with my attorney, staged, fictitious conversations, where I loudly discussed my concern about managing my affairs and my plan to grant power of attorney to someone I trust implicitly. The cameras captured Clarissa's reactions. She was excited, eager. She increased her surveillance, taking more photos, spending more time on my computer. I caught her one afternoon making a call from my landline. She didn't know I'd installed a call recorder. She was talking to Victor. "It's working," she whispered. "He's ready. Maybe another 2 weeks and he'll sign. Then we can move everything before anyone notices. His kids barely call. They won't know until it's too late." She was right that my children rarely called. My son was in Singapore running his own business. My daughter was in California with her family. We'd grown apart over the years, especially after Margaret died. It was one of my great regrets. Clarissa had been studying me well. She knew I was isolated, vulnerable. But she'd made one critical error. She'd underestimated me. I spent hours planning my next moves. This couldn't just be about stopping Clarissa and Victor. They could disappear, try again with someone else. I needed to ensure they were finished permanently. I needed evidence so overwhelming that they'd face serious criminal charges. And I needed to do it in a way that exposed their entire operation. I consulted with my attorney, Thomas Brennan, who'd been with me for 30 years. When I laid out what I discovered, his face went pale. "Edmund, we need to call the police immediately." "Not yet," I said. "If we move now, we get Clarissa for snooping, maybe trespassing. Victor stays free." Their operation continues with the next victim. I want them both destroyed. Thomas argued, but he knew me well enough to recognize when my mind was made up. Instead, he helped me plan. We prepared documents, fake documents, that would be irresistible bait. I knew while leaving the bulk of my estate to Clarissa, in gratitude for her devoted service. A power of attorney form, partially filled out. Bank transfer authorizations. All of it carefully crafted to look legitimate, but actually worthless, with subtle errors that would invalidate them legally while looking perfect to laypeople. We also prepared the real documents, new accounts they didn't know about, a genuine new will that left everything to my children with specific provisions excluding Clarissa and warning against any contested claims. I moved the bulk of my liquid assets into accounts Clarissa hadn't discovered, leaving just enough in the known accounts to seem legitimate, but not enough to make stealing worthwhile. And then I set up the finale. I arranged for the FBI to be involved. This was wire fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, all federal crimes. I had an agent I'd worked with years ago when Hartwell Industries dealt with corporate espionage. He was very interested in my case, especially when I explained that Clarissa and Victor likely had other victims. The trap was set. Now I just needed to spring it at exactly the right moment. 3 days later, I gave the performance of my life. It was a Wednesday morning. Clarissa arrived at her usual time. I was in the study, surrounded by papers, looking frustrated and exhausted. It wasn't hard to fake. I was genuinely tired from the stress of maintaining this charade. "Clarissa," I called out as I heard her in the hallway. "Could you come in here, please? I need your help." She entered, concern painted on her face. "Of course, Mr. Hartwell. What's wrong?" I gestured at the mess of documents. "I've been trying to organize all of this, to get my affairs in order, but it's overwhelming. I'm not as sharp as I used to be. I keep getting confused." "You seem perfectly sharp to me," she said soothingly, sitting down across from me. "But everyone needs help sometimes. What can I do?" I pushed a document across the desk, one of the fake power of attorney forms Thomas and I had prepared. "I've been thinking about what we discussed. You're right that I need someone to help manage things. You've been so loyal, so trustworthy. I'd like you to have power of attorney over my financial affairs." Her eyes widened. She reached for the document, then pulled back, playing reluctant. "Mr. Hartwell, I couldn't." "That's too much responsibility. What about your children?" "My children have their own lives," I said bitterly, and that part was genuine. "They call once a month if I'm lucky. You're here every day. You care about me. You're the logical choice." I'm honored," she said, her hand finally touching the document. "But shouldn't you discuss this with your attorney?" "I've already prepared the paperwork. Thomas helped me. I just need you to sign as the attorney in fact, and I'll sign as the principal. It's all standard." I picked up a pen, signed the document with a flourish, and pushed it to her with the pen. "Please, Clarissa." It would give me such peace of mind. I watched her internal struggle. This was happening faster than she'd planned, but it was also exactly what she wanted. The temptation was too great. Slowly, she picked up the pen and signed. "There," I said, taking back the document. "Now I can rest easy knowing someone I trust is looking out for my interests. Let me make copies of this. Why don't you take a break, have some tea? You've earned it." She left, practically floating. I waited until she was in the kitchen, then made several copies of the signed document. One I placed in an envelope on my desk, prominently displayed. The original I locked in my safe. Then I sent Thomas a text. "It's done." What Clarissa didn't know was that the document she'd signed had several fatal flaws that made it legally meaningless. The notary section was improperly formatted. The witness lines were in the wrong order. The legal language had subtle but critical errors. Any court would reject it immediately. But to Clarissa, it looked perfect. The seal, the signatures, the legal jargon all seemed legitimate. More importantly, by signing it, she'd given me evidence of her intent to commit fraud. Over the next 2 days, I continued my performance. I gave Clarissa access to one of my bank accounts, not the main ones, but a smaller account I'd set up specifically for this purpose, containing $50,000. I told her I needed her to help pay some bills, to manage some expenses. The cameras caught her photographing the account information immediately. That evening, her call to Victor was almost giddy. "He gave me account access," she whispered. "50,000 in this one, but once I have the power of attorney working, I can access everything. The attorney we consulted said once I have POA, I can transfer assets before anyone can stop it. We just need to move fast." "How much total?" Victor asked. "Over 100 million. The real estate alone is worth 60 million, and there's 47 million liquid. Edmund's kids are useless. They won't even know until we're gone. We can be in Brazil in 3 days. Brazil. They'd planned their escape route. "What about the old man?" Victor asked. "Once we have the money moved, he's irrelevant. I'll quit, disappear. If he tries to fight it, he'll be tied up in court for years. By then we'll be unreachable." I listened to the recording in my bedroom, my hands shaking with rage. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to ruin me, leave me broke and fighting legal battles in my twilight years. But I had one more card to play. On Friday morning, I called Clarissa into the study. She arrived with her usual smile, but I could see the anticipation in her eyes. "Clarissa, I need to make a substantial transfer today. Thomas helped me identify some investment opportunities, but they require immediate funding. I need you to help me move $5 million from my primary account to the investment account." $5 million. I watched greed flash across her face. "Of course, Mr. Hartwell. Whatever you need." I pulled out the real account information for the decoy account I'd set up. "Here are the details. I've called the bank and authorized you to make the transfer. They're expecting your call. Just give them the codes I've written down here, confirm your identity as my attorney-in-fact, and they'll process it immediately." She took the paper, her hands trembling slightly. "I'll take care of it right away. Use the phone in here," I suggested. "I want to make sure everything goes smoothly." What Clarissa didn't know was that the bank number I'd given her didn't go to my real bank. It went to a number set up by the FBI, with agents posing as bank employees. This was it, the moment she'd commit wire fraud while being recorded. She dialed. I pretended to review some papers while listening to every word. "Yes, hello, I'm calling about a transfer for Edmund Hartwell." "Yes, I'm his attorney-in-fact. The code is 7749B. "Yes, $5 million. To the investment account, number 4487201. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I knew what was happening. The banker was confirming details, asking verification questions, all while recording everything. Clarissa answered each question, provided each code, authorized the transfer. "Excellent," she finally said. "How long will it take to process?" "By end of business today?" "Perfect. Thank you." She hung up and turned to me with a radiant smile. "All done, Mr. Hartwell. Your money is being transferred now." It should be in the investment account by this evening. Wonderful, I said. Thank you, Clarissa. You're such a help. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? You've earned it. She looked surprised but pleased. Are you sure? Absolutely. Go enjoy yourself. I'll see you Monday. She practically skipped out of the room. I waited until I heard her car leave the driveway, then I made a call. She took the bait. I told Agent Morrison. Full wire fraud attempt recorded. We've got her, he confirmed. And we've been watching Victor. He's been on his laptop searching for flights to Brazil, looking at how to convert US dollars to reais. We have enough for conspiracy charges on both of them. The team is ready to move in. Wait until Monday, I said. I want her to spend the weekend thinking she's won. Let her taste victory before you take it away. There was a pause. Edmund, are you sure? What if they run? They won't run until they think they have the money. Right now they think it's being processed. They'll wait for confirmation, plan their escape. They're not going anywhere until they believe they've won. Agent Morrison agreed reluctantly. The FBI would conduct surveillance over the weekend, but the arrest would happen Monday morning. I spent that weekend in an unusual state of mind. Part of me felt the satisfaction of a plan coming together. Another part felt deeply sad. I'd been betrayed by someone I'd trusted, someone I'd welcomed into the most intimate corners of my life. It reminded me how alone I really was. I called my son in Singapore. We had a long conversation, the first real one in years. I told him everything, not just about Clarissa, but about how isolated I'd become, how much I missed having family around. He promised to visit soon, and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. I called my daughter too. Same conversation, same promises. Maybe something good would come from this nightmare. On Sunday evening, Clarissa called me. Mr. Hartwell, I just wanted to check in. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Clarissa. Thank you for asking. See you tomorrow? Of course. 7 o'clock as always. But she wouldn't make it to my house at 7 o'clock Monday morning. At 6:45 a.m. on Monday, as Clarissa Donovan Martinez was getting into her car to drive to my estate, FBI agents surrounded her. At the exact same moment, agents entered the motel room where Victor Martinez was staying. The operation was coordinated, precise, and overwhelming. I watched it on my laptop via a video feed Agent Morrison had set up for me. I saw Clarissa's face go from confusion to shock to terror as she realized what was happening. I saw the handcuffs, the reading of rights, the search of her vehicle that turned up forged documents, my checkbook information, photographs of my financial records. At Victor's motel, agents found even more evidence: software for forging signatures, instructions for creating fake estate documents, a list of potential future victims with notes about their assets and vulnerabilities. But the real jackpot was Victor's laptop. When forensic specialists examined it, they found evidence of 4 other victims beyond the 2 my investigator had identified. 4 other elderly people who'd been scammed, manipulated, or worse. One of them, an 80-year-old woman in Florida, had died under suspicious circumstances after changing her will to benefit her trusted caregiver, a woman matching Clarissa's description using a different name. The FBI was building a case that would put both of them away for decades. At 9 a.m., Agent Morrison called me. It's done. They're in custody. Clarissa lawyered up immediately, but Victor is talking. He's trying to blame everything on her, saying she manipulated him. Classic criminal behavior. Will the charges stick? I asked. Oh, they'll stick. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, forgery. And if they can prove involvement in that suspicious death in Florida, add homicide to the list. You did good, Edmund. You saved yourself and probably saved future victims too. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. That afternoon, Thomas came to the house. We sat in my study, the same room where this had all begun, and he walked me through the legal aftermath. All the documents Clarissa had signed were voided. My real will and estate plan were secure. My assets were safe. Everything she tried to steal remained mine. You outplayed them completely, Thomas said. It's actually impressive. Most people in your situation would have just fired her or called the police immediately. You built an entire counter-operation. I was angry, I admitted. I wanted to win, not just survive. Well, you won. Spectacularly. But had I? I'd protected my money, yes. I'd stopped the criminals. But I'd also been reminded of my vulnerability, my isolation, my misplaced trust. Over the following weeks, more details emerged. Clarissa and Victor had been running this scam for 7 years. They'd successfully stolen over $3 million from various victims. The Florida case was being reopened as a homicide investigation. Other victims were coming forward. The media got hold of the story. "Millionaires made arrested in elaborate fraud scheme," read one headline. "Elderly targeted in multi-million-dollar scam," read another. My name was kept out of most reports, but people in my social circles knew. I received calls from acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years, expressing shock and support. My children both flew in to see me. My son, David, stayed for a week. My daughter, Rebecca, brought her family for a weekend. We talked, really talked, about Margaret's death, about the distance that had grown between us, about making changes. "Dad," Rebecca said one evening as we sat on the terrace watching the sunset, "I'm sorry we weren't around more. We left you vulnerable to someone like Clarissa." "You didn't leave me vulnerable," I corrected. "I isolated myself. But I'm glad you're here now." And I was. The revenge I'd taken on Clarissa was satisfying, but the real victory was reconnecting with my family. Clarissa Donovan Martinez and Victor Martinez both pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Victor received 20 years in federal prison. Clarissa, as the primary architect of the scheme and as the person directly involved with the suspicious death in Florida, received 35 years. I attended the sentencing hearing. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood and looked at Clarissa for the first time since her arrest. "You came into my home as an employee and became someone I trusted," I said. "You listened to my stories about my wife, you served me meals, you organized my life. And all the while, you were planning to take everything from me, to leave me destitute and broken in my final years. You preyed on my loneliness and my grief." Clarissa stared at the defense table, refusing to meet my eyes. "But you failed," I continued. "Not just because I caught you, but because your betrayal reminded me of what actually matters. You tried to steal my money, but you inadvertently gave me back my family. So in a strange way, I should thank you. You showed me that I'd been investing in the wrong things, assets instead of relationships." I sat down. The judge sentenced her, and I walked out of that courthouse feeling truly free for the first time in years. I sold the estate. Too many bad memories. I bought a smaller place closer to Rebecca and her family. Dated visits regularly, and we've started a tradition of quarterly trips together, just father and son reconnecting. I also changed how I think about my wealth. I established a foundation to help victims of elder fraud, funding education programs and support services. I'm working with law enforcement agencies to develop better protective measures for vulnerable seniors. The money I worked so hard to earn over my lifetime will do good now, will help people, will mean something beyond just numbers in an account. As for Clarissa and Victor, they're where they belong. Sometimes, I think about the woman who knocked on my study door that September morning with my Earl Grey tea. I wonder if there was ever a moment when she felt genuine affection for me, or if it was all calculation from the start. I'll never know. But I do know this: revenge isn't just about punishment. It's about justice. It's about taking back control. It's about refusing to be a victim. And in the end, the best revenge wasn't seeing Clarissa in handcuffs, though that was satisfying. The best revenge was building a better life, reconnecting with my children, finding purpose again. They tried to take everything from me. Instead, they gave me a reason to fight, to rebuild, to remember what truly mattered. That's the revenge I'll carry with me. Not bitterness, but renewal. I'm 74 now, and I'm happier than I've been in years. I have Sunday dinners with Rebecca's family. I video call David in Singapore every week. I volunteer with the Elder Fraud Foundation. I'm writing my memoirs, not about business deals, but about family, loss, and second chances. Margaret would be proud. Not of the revenge I took, but of the man I became after. And that, in the end, is the greatest victory of all.